Hey everyone, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show and A Reason in Theology. So I want to follow up with the video that I did yesterday talking about this ecumenical prayer event that took place at the Colosseum in Rome with quite a few representatives from a number of ecclesiastical communities. Of course, the Pope was there. He was the one who put on the event. You have the Eastern Orthodox were represented and present, including the Patriarch of Alexandria. You have the Coptic Patriarch present, so you then have the Oriental Orthodox being represented, and a few others, Assyrian Church of the East, I believe, as well as Anglicans, Lutherans, Methodists. There was notably, as I pointed out yesterday, a few female clergy there, as well as what appeared to be an LGBT minister wearing either an LGBT prayer shawl or prayer stole or just some kind of scarf, one of the two, can't really tell which one it is, but she was there among the ministers and clergy. And so we were talking a little bit about that yesterday, but I didn't get a chance to really talk about the situation with the Eastern Orthodox who were present and how this is in conflict with some of the canons that the Eastern Orthodox hold to. And so this creates a little bit of a controversy among Eastern Orthodox online who are familiar with the canons that are held to by the Eastern Orthodox, but are consistently violated by the bishops and the patriarchs, which causes a great deal of concern for Orthodox laity as well as clergy. And simultaneous to this, interestingly enough, the Patriarch of Constantinople was commemorating someone that some of the Orthodox deemed to be schismatic. And when he commemorated his name in the liturgy, a man shouts out, anathema. In other words, he anathematizes the Patriarch of Constantinople. We'll take a look at that and also at a few of the canons that Eastern Orthodoxy have preserved from the first millennium in the early church, prohibiting prayers with any non-Orthodox. And so I want to take a look at that. All that is coming up next right here on The Michael Lofton Show. All right, before we dive in and I show you the video and we consider the canons in question and also take a look at the situation with the Patriarch of Constantinople, I want you to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you appreciate the content of this channel where we talk about all sorts of things, a wide range of topics, including what's going on in various ecclesial communities, including the Eastern Orthodox. And I want to show you a clip of the service that took place at the Colosseum to maybe kick this off. And here you can see, again, the Oriental Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Catholics, Lutherans, everyone praying together. And then we see most notably the Patriarch of Alexandria doing a reading. And right behind him, you'll note the LGBT minister. So let's take a look at the footage in question. Here we go.
Fratelli e sorelle, uniamo le nostre voci nella preghiera che il Signore ci ha insegnato. Padre nostro che sei nei cieli, sia santificato il tuo nome, venga il tuo regno, sia fatta la tua volontà come in cielo così in terra. Dacci oggi il nostro pane quotidiano e rimetti a noi i nostri debiti, come anche noi li rimettiamo ai nostri debitori, e non abbandonarci alla tentazione, ma liberaci dal male.
Σεβασμιότατη, εξοχότατη, σεβάσμιο ιερατείων, μοναχοί και μοναχές, αγαπητοί εν Χριστώ αδελφοί και αδελφές. Στην πιο δύσκολη ώρα της ιστορικής παρουσίας του Ιησού στη γη, Την ώρα που αποχώρησε από τον μυστικό δείπνο και λίγο πριν να συλληφθεί προσέφερε στους μαθητές του το ανεκτήμητο δώρο που και εμείς σήμερα ομοφόνος επικαλούμεθα για ένα κόσμο πληγωμένο από τη βία των όπλων, από την αμαρτία, από την αγωνία της κυριαρχίας και της εξουσίας. Ο Κύριος απευθύνεται στους Αποστόλους λέγοντας «Ειρήνη αφίημη ημίν, ειρήνη την εμεί δίδομη ημίν, ου καθώς ο κόσμος δίδωση, εγώ δίδομαι ημίν, μη ταρασέστο ημών η καρδία, μη δε δηλιάτο». Είναι μια εκπληκτική δήλωση. Ετοιμάζεται να θυσιαστεί για μας και εμπιστεύεται τον Πατέρα, γιατί γνωρίζει ότι τέλος θα νικήσει η ζωή που θα συνεχιστεί από τους μαθητές του. Σε κάθε ένα επαναλαμβάνει «Μη ταρασέστο ημών η καρδία, μη δε δηλιάτο». Αν τηρήσουν το λόγο του ακόμα και στη δοκιμασία δεν θα είναι μόνοι. Ο Πατέρας και ο Κύριος θα έρθουν να γίνουν ένα μαζί τους και ο Παράκλητος, το Άγιο Πνεύμα, θα τους διδάξει τα πάντα και θα τους υπενθυμίσει όλα όσα τους είπε. Ας γίνει αυτό και σε εμάς, στις εκκλησίες μας. Ας γίνει σε αυτή την εποχή που υψώνει τους δυνατούς και δοκιμάζει τους ασθενείς, ενώ οι λέξεις πετιούνται σαν βόμβες ικανές να καταστρέψουν αιώνες συνύπαρξης και κατανόησης. Υπάρχουν απειλές και επιθέσεις, όμως το σήμερα των χριστιανών.
Okay, so you kind of get a feel for what was taking place there. So I noted at least 4 female clergy, and again, most notably the one with the, again, either some kind of LGBT scarf or LGBT stole on this female minister. Now, the person you just saw there reading is the Eastern Orthodox Patriarch of Alexandria. Right behind him is the Oriental Orthodox Patriarch of Alexandria, the Coptic Patriarch. And so both of them were present right next to the female ministers. Now, in the case of Eastern Orthodoxy, and in the case of the Patriarch of Alexandria, the man that you saw reading there, he already does have female clergy for the diaconate. So, for example, he is very well known for having restored the female diaconate. Here is one of his deaconesses that he ordained. Here's a few others that he ordained, and they serve a liturgical role in the church during the liturgy. And so it's a little bit more involved than you might think liturgically. But there are no female priestesses or anything like that for the Eastern Orthodox. But the Patriarch of Alexandria does have female deacons or deaconesses. Now, it's curious that he's praying alongside of the Pope, the Oriental Orthodox, Lutherans, Anglicans, Methodists, and it causes some difficulties for a lot of Eastern Orthodox because there are canons that prohibit this. For example, take a look at this. You can see very clearly here. Try to enlarge it for you. This is from the Apostolic Canons, very early canons from roughly around the 4th century, just depending on when you date the Apostolic Canons. Oddly enough, I believe John of Damascus, one of the late church fathers in the East, held to this as a canonical book in the New Testament, oddly enough. But very, very important, the Apostolic Canons, both for East and West. And the Apostolic Canons are still on the books in the Code of Canon Law for Eastern Orthodox. They call it the Rudder. So their version of the Code of Canon Law, it's still there. Now, it's kind of up to the clergy on how to interpret some of these things, but there is some debate on how loose can they be with this? Can they be strict with it, relaxed? Um, and does that distinction, being strict and versus relaxed with the canons, apply to these types of canons? There's a big debate among them, but take a look at the apostolic canons, very early canon 45. It says, let a bishop, presbyter, priest, or deacon who has only prayed with heretics be excommunicated. So if you just pray with a heretic, according to the apostolic canon, you're excommunicated. But if he has permitted them to perform any clerical office, let them be deposed. So this is just one of numerous examples in the early church of canons prohibiting any kind of prayer with schismatics, with heretics, with anyone who's not part of the Orthodox Church, right? And if you're reading these canons as a Catholic, you'll interpret this as, praying with anyone outside the Catholic Church. You would say you can't do this because the canon prohibits it, right? But the Eastern Orthodox read this as they can't pray with anyone outside the Orthodox communion because of canons like this. And so whenever this happens, there's a lot of Orthodox who are concerned, and they start to wonder, is their patriarch excommunicated? In fact, there are canons that the Eastern Orthodox hold to, going back to the controversy with Photius in the 9th century, that allows for them to judge their patriarch. So if they feel that their patriarch is a heretic, they do have canons in the rudder that allows them to sever communion with their patriarch. Now, for the Catholic position, there are rival canons from that same time period that prohibit Catholics from doing that. And again, it stems back to that controversy with Photius and the two different judgments that we see being made on that situation in Constantinople. But the Orthodox kind of still hold to that stream that allows for them to judge their patriarchs and sever communion with them if they feel that their patriarch is a heretic. So when they see this kind of stuff, it causes a disruption in communion for some of the Orthodox who are kind of paying attention to the canons and they see what's going on. I'll give you another one. This is just one among, again, many. This is from the Council of Laodicea. This is a council that was regional in nature, around the 360s, so right after Nicaea 1, Canon 33. Again, it's still on the books there in the Orthodox Code of Canon Law, the Rudder. It says for Canon 33, no one shall join in prayers with heretics or schismatics. So it's a very clear-cut, very blanket statement. Nobody, not just clergy, right? In the previous case, we saw clergy. In this one, it's talking about everyone, like including laity, shall join in prayers with heretics or schismatics. And the idea is that it's contrary to divine law to pray with people who are in schism because they have severed themselves from the one true body of Christ, from the one true church, and therefore they're in rebellion. Now, some have tried to kind of read into these canons and reinterpret them to mean those who are formal heretics and formal schismatics, like they've deliberately severed communion and made that choice. You can't pray with them. But people who are kind of born into a schism and born into heresy, they're not culpable, and maybe you can pray with them. That's kind of more of a rereading into some of these canons. Certainly those in the early church would not have understood it that way. And they felt that if you pray with heretics, you are a heretic. If you pray with a schismatic, you are a schismatic. In the same way that those that you share communion with, you're one body with, according to the New Testament, according to Paul. That's why you can't share communion with that's why you can't share communion with schismatics, because when you share communion with them, you're saying you're in one church with them. And if you're not in one church, you're lying. And so that's why there tended to be those prohibitions on sharing in the Eucharist, on praying with others. Although there's been a rocky history of that, as I've pointed out in some of my lectures. In some cases, you do have Catholics and Orthodox who are in schism with each other, but still receiving communion, having mutual ordinations, hearing each other's confessions. In some cases, popes privately allowed, if you had a patriarch like the Patriarch of Antioch who secretly converted to Catholicism and acknowledged the papacy and the papal dogmas, the Pope would allow that patriarch to stay Eastern Orthodox and not to announce their conversion, and to still remain as an Eastern Orthodox patriarch publicly. So you have some rare cases like that, right? So there's kind of this rocky history of communicatio in sacris, the sharing in sacred things and sharing in sacraments. But as a general prohibition, and the Holy Office even states it's forbidden by divine law, you can't have any kind of joining in prayers with heretics and schismatics. So this is something that, again, kind of shakes up the Eastern Orthodox whenever they see this, because, again, they tend to be aware of these canons. Now, from the Catholic perspective, these canons are no longer on the books for the most part. Now we have the 1983 edition of the Code of Canon Law, and since the time of the Second Vatican Council, there is an allowance for sharing in the Eucharist with schismatics and with heretics in certain cases, and there is an allowance for joint prayer. We can see that in some of the documents of Vatican II explaining that, and then also in subsequent documents. And so I think from the Catholic perspective, if you go and pull the average Catholic parishioner, they're not really familiar with these canons because they're long gone. But for Orthodox, I think they're a little bit more sensitive to these things, and they're a little bit more aware because they are still on the books. And so those are just two examples, right? But one thing that I saw was that I saw a lot of people say, when I did my show yesterday, oh, come home to Eastern Orthodoxy, because you got all these problems with what the Pope's doing here with ecumenism. Come home to Eastern Orthodoxy. And I was just left scratching my head because I was thinking, all of the Eastern Orthodox churches are represented there. You have the Patriarch of Constantinople, Alexandria, represented there, personally participating. It seems like in a lot of cases, Orthodox just aren't even aware that their patriarchs and bishops are participating in this. And for some who are aware, they just say, well, it's not a problem for us because, our patriarchs aren't infallible. But, just in point of fact, just a gentle reminder, popes aren't infallible when they do this either. So the distinction between an infallible pope and fallible patriarchs is really irrelevant here. So I don't see how that really gets anybody out of a bind. Be that as it may, I noticed there was a lack of awareness on part of a lot of Orthodox who are trying to say, come home to Eastern Orthodoxy so that you don't have to deal with this. And I think that sets people up for failure because they end up finding out actually it's going on all the time. And it's a little amazing that, in fact, some people aren't aware of this. And I noticed a whole day later after this event, there's not one report on the Patriarch of Alexandria, participating in this prayer meeting. Not one. Nobody has said anything. Not Catholic, not Eastern Orthodox, not even secular news. It seems that I'm the only one that maybe I'm the only one who's aware. I don't know. Surely not, right? Surely people are aware. I don't know why they're not commenting on it. And so I would like to maybe see what some Orthodox think about this. How do they process this when they see this? Now, here's another interesting one. So, Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, was commemorating Dumenko in Romania, and some Eastern Orthodox consider him to be schismatic. So when the Patriarch did this, a man shouted out, anathema, anathematizing the Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew, at the liturgy. And they kind of pretended like nothing happened, but you can kind of see the clergy smiling, but they clearly heard it and knew it happened. And again, you kind of have that notion where laity can sever communion with their patriarchs if they deem them to be a heretic. And you got some ancient stories that, when Nestorius was preaching in Constantinople, heresies against the Theotokos, you had a layman who shouted out against him in the middle of the divine liturgy and anathematized him and all that. And so you can still see some of that taking place today among the Eastern Orthodox. So take a look at this from Union of Orthodox Journalists in Bucharest, Patriarch Bartholomew commemorates Dumenko amid anathema cries. So the service was dedicated to Saint Demetrius the New, the patron saint of Bucharest, and was timed to the 100th anniversary of the Romanian Patriarchate. During the Great Entrance, Patriarch Bartholomew, together with the primates of other local Orthodox churches, pronounced the name of Epiphanius Dumenko as Metropolitan of Kiev. Immediately after his name was spoken, a loud cry of anathema was heard from someone in the congregation. I'm laughing because it reminds me of that time when Pope Francis went to, I think it was Greece, and there was this Eastern Orthodox priest who shouted at him, Papa, you're a heretic. It just kind of reminds me of that taking place here. You can actually see this on video. So let's maybe go to the clip where that happens. They have it here. Please let me know if there's maybe any difficulty in hearing the audio. So let me share my screen again, and let's see here. Okay, let me know if you can hear it. All right.
Ioannu Tyrannon, Rostislavu Prešov, Epifaniu Kievu.
There it was. Watch, you can see the patriarch will start to smile here, right? He clearly heard.
Τον συλλειτουργούν των ημίν Αγίων Αρχιερέων και των λοιπών Αγίων Αρχιερέων της Αγίας του Χριστού Μεγάλης Εκκλησίας και της Αγίας
You can see these guys are all smiling. This guy can't hold it in right here. There you go. So at least there are some, Eastern Orthodox who have a fight in them whenever they perceive some kind of heresy in the ranks of the clergy. They're willing to shout out during the divine liturgy and make their feelings known. Again, it's a little different with the Code of Canon Law and the tradition that has been received in the West, where you don't have that authority to judge your own patriarch. Only the Pope can judge your patriarch. And if you're in the Latin West and part of the Latin Rite, your patriarch is the Pope. So, this idea of kind of judging your patriarch if you deem him to be a heretic is not necessarily kept in the canonical tradition to a degree. You still see Catholics doing it, right? But it's a little different canonically. And there are some canons that come down from the Eighth Ecumenical Council, the one in the Catholic Church, not the Eighth Ecumenical Council for Eastern Orthodox, but the Eighth Ecumenical Council in the Catholic tradition. So Constantinople 4, 869 to 870. So again, not 879 to 880 that the Orthodox hold to, or at least some of them did, but the one 10 years prior that anathematized Photius. So that one, Canon 21, indicates nobody can judge the Pope. It's kind of like that Tupac moment, only God can judge me, right? So nobody can judge the Pope. But there have been some different canons that have come down, or different versions of that canon that have come down. And so you'll see, based on that and others, different canons saying the first see is judged by no one except in the case of heresy, some clause like that. But even in that particular case, Constantinople 4 says that, yeah, you have that clause of except in the case of heresy, but it's only a pope who can judge another pope for heresy. So in other words, it's a living pope who can judge a predecessor pope in the case of heresy, and they cite the case of Honorius. But nobody can judge a living pope, even in the case of heresy. So only a living pope can judge a predecessor pope for heresies. So yeah, it's a fascinating thing, right? But that phrase kind of dropped out. That exceptional clause kind of dropped out. So if you look at the Code of Canon Law today, it just says the first see is judged by no one. It doesn't have any kind of exceptions mentioned there. So, anyways, without going into the differences here in the canons in any more detail, you can see that there are some different approaches here, and you can maybe see it manifesting here in the reaction that's taking place at the liturgy. So, I thought that was interesting because there are some Orthodox outlets that are reporting on it. The Union of Orthodox Journalists are commenting on it. The Orthodox orthochristian.com website is commenting on it. But for some reason, nobody is commenting on the Patriarch of Alexandria, prayers with the Pope, prayers with these female ministers and LGBT ministers. Nothing. I'm a little curious as to why that is. Surely they've gotten the memo by now, so is nobody going to say anything? I'm curious to know what the Orthodox are going to say to this. Now, with that being said, I want to just simply say that if you want to know my thoughts on the situation with the Pope there and the Pope putting on this event, and also the interreligious service that took place afterwards that the Orthodox also participated in and were part of. I did a video on that yesterday that you can take a look at. I'll put a link to it here in the comment section for you to go and examine. And I think you'll find it very, very fascinating. But anyways, I wanted to talk about this and briefly introduce the topic and also show you maybe some of those canons that people are going to cite from the early church that prohibit these kinds of events. In fact, up until Pope Pius XI in Mortalium Animos, this was also forbidden in Catholicism. Let me maybe even show you that document, right? This is 1928. So as recent as 1928 in chapter 2 here, you have Pope Pius XI, who says any Catholic who does this kind of stuff, prays with non-Catholics, is altogether abandoning the divinely revealed religion. So he doesn't see it as kind of like a disciplinary thing that can be just, changed according to the times and according to the circumstances. He sees if you have any of this kind of interreligious prayer services, he says, it's clear the person has altogether abandoned the divinely revealed religion. And so there's been a pretty big shift, right, in the post-conciliar period, going from 1928, where a pope can say this, all the way to just actually the conciliar period. Vatican II itself allows for it. So even just within 40 years, there's kind of a big change there. And it hasn't been necessarily explained and how this is harmonizable, how this, coheres together, or is there some kind of contradiction? The magisterium hasn't done any kind of in-depth attempt to harmonize or explain it or reconcile it. Nothing extensive, and so that still remains to be done, and I think should be done to maybe help people understand how there isn't a contradiction, right? Because I do see Eastern Orthodox and other people who are critics of the church who will point this out and say, you see, the magisterium's contradicting itself, kind of thing. But yeah, he says, not only are those who hold this opinion in error and deceived, talking about these joint prayer services, but also in distorting the idea of true religion, they reject it. He says, so if you're participating in it, you're rejecting the true religion. And little by little, turn aside to naturalism and atheism, as it's called, from which it clearly follows that one who supports those who hold these theories and attempt to realize them is altogether abandoning the divinely revealed religion. And so you could see that there a lot more in the document. He's very forceful about it, very emphatic about it, where you can't at all have any of these kinds of joint ecumenical prayer services, even if they're out of good intentions. He just sees it as completely impossible to do, right? And maybe we can do a show going over it in more detail, and then looking at some of the documents from Vatican II and the post-conciliar documents that talk a little bit about this and take a different position. Okay, so anyways, wanted to make you briefly aware of that. And like I said, much more can be said about this, but this is just an introductory video. So hopefully that will begin the discussion. I would love to hear from y'all. So let me know your thoughts there in the comment section. And like I said, make sure to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. You know, as a theologian, I have looked at this situation and many others where there are these tensions in the magisterium, and I've proposed some theories here and there in my lectures on the magisterium, attempts to maybe harmonize and reconcile some of these tensions in the magisterium. If you want to see my attempt at doing that, for whatever it's worth, as a person who's just devoted a great deal of time and expertise into the question of the teaching authority of the church, the magisterium, and points of continuity, points of discontinuity. That's kind of my expertise. That's my forte, right? But if you want to learn more about that, visit rtcourses.com and go and check out the Magisterial Studies program, that bundle here that I have, where you can get my courses that I offer at the university level on the magisterium, talking a lot about this. So go and check that out if you want to hear more. And of course, like I said, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. See you tomorrow. God bless.